Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UFOs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Sol Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday live edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Miles Lewis, and gracious. It is August 28th, 2024, and this is the weekly live news and media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives Scientific Anomaly Institute. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in live or listening to us in the replay. And I'm still trying to get ready for the show, folks. Sorry. It's been a great week. Last Wednesday, of course, we had on guest Greg Bishop to talk about the SUAPS, Society for UAP Studies summer conference that was held online a week or two ago, week and a half ago. And we've got a link tonight in the Flipboard to other people's reviews of that. Of course, Greg and I were talking about his experience watching that presentation. And of course, both of us have been so excited about the fact that there is now this groundswell of academic involvement after so many decades, more than half a century, 60, 70 plus years of mostly civilian military involvement investigating UFOs. And it's a great thing to have academics involved finally. Well, let's jump right in. Oh, also, yeah, last week, besides Wednesday's show with Greg Bishop this past weekend, we had our monthly Anomaly Academy cadet level for our Patreon presenting a presenter, Joshua Cutchin, on his fantastic Understanding the UFO as a Death Symbol, Soulcraft. This is the effort of his, born out of his 2022 2+ to 3 volume set, Ecology of Souls, A New Mythology of Death and the Paranormal. And it was a fascinating presentation. Josh has just done so much important work in this, and he's not stopping. He's continuing on to investigate new areas. And I don't think we've heard the last of people's examination of his hypothesis as presented in Ecology of Souls. Well, over at the old Flipboard, we have a variety of articles ranging from several things that we're going to get to. There is a new remote viewing magazine called Gestalt, Perspectives on Remote Viewing. It is free over at magcloud.com. We've got the link there in the Flipboard. There is also, I think, it's called 8 Martinis, or there's some kind of remote viewing digital magazine with the words Martini in the title, and a bunch of other articles that we just flipped over this last day or so. UFOs in the library basement from The Observer. Amelia's Earhart plane, has her plane been found by Deep Sea Vision? This article over the debrief by Christopher Plain, 50,000-year-old tree resin revealing sophisticated technological processes could rewrite history of ancient human expansion. We unfortunately sadly lost Bigfooter Henry Franzoni. Loren Coleman, as always, has done a fine job providing an obituary for this anomalous researcher. And we've got a link to one of the documentaries about Henry and his experiences and investigations involving Bigfoot. But of course, still in the news, tons of links to reviews of, interviews with Lou Elizondo talking about his book, Imminent. And, the thing I'm hearing the most, perhaps, is besides people saying, see, he's saying Roswell is true. He's saying we do have crash saucers. We do have pickled aliens. None of which is new. He has apparently walked back within the book. I have not read it. I have not purchased a copy yet. I'm mostly just going off of other people's reviews of it. And of course, I did see some of the excerpts when they were accidentally leaked. But apparently in the book, he's walking back his being the quote-unquote director of ATIP, and is now saying that he was just one of several key people involved. And there has been not just rumors, there has absolutely been people who are in contact with the other folks that were involved with OSAP and ATIP who are saying that it is not exactly accurate what the front of the book, Imminent, says, that Lou Elizondo was the director of this UFO program in the Pentagon. There's some really good examinations of this. John Greenwald at the Black Vault, of course, is going over some more recently revealed documents that he is stressing point to some misstatements by Elizondo and others, trying to clarify what exactly is the history. And the actual head of ATIP and then later the UAP task force, I believe, is the Lukatsky fellow, who apparently is going to be giving his own version of history in that regard. And of course, we've got Micah Hanks and others reporting the same thing, that there does seem to be this disconnect and discrepancy between the cover of the book, what Elizondo has said previously about being the director of this program, and all the evidence showing that it was not, it's in fact its own program. It was not a sub-program of OSAP, but the nickname for OSAP and its transition from being a funded actual OSAP or investigation to the things that we've seen in the years most recently since then. Meanwhile, other news, we've got Loch Ness News Micro Monsters, incredible images from below the surface of Loch Ness shows life, as well as the reporting on that by Tim Banal over at Coast to Coast AM. Holographic camera photographs micro monsters lurking in Loch Ness. And big news, of course, coming up this weekend is the Anomicon virtual conference on the Anomalous, being put on by Ryan Sprague. I highly encourage folks to check that out. You can go to anomicon.com. This is a free 2-day online lecture with more than a dozen presentations that I'm sure will be fascinating. Meanwhile, the debrief.org, Micah Hanks has reported on this fresh news from 2 days ago. The Pentagon's official UAP investigative office has a new full-time director. Of course, Sean Kirkpatrick was barely there, checked out, did his interviews, is still kind of saying negative things about the UFO community. And there was an interim director, and now there is this fellow whose name I have not committed to memory yet. But you can hear some great reportage on that, and as well as allusions to what I was just talking about with Lou Elizondo and Imminent in Micah's latest episode, his Micah Hanks podcast, Emergence, Aliens, Crashes, and the Origins of the Modern UFO Mythos, where there's a very interesting interview with a Charles Lear, who I'm not familiar with, but he definitely has some very interesting things to say about the modern era, the 80s to 90s UFO period, and the rise of the myths that are still dominant today: crash saucers, pickled aliens, government cover-ups, Area 51, all that classic stuff, but helping, as others have before him, and certainly more will since then, in the coming years, comb over all the information and try to recreate what exactly happened, why there is so much disinformation, really, and how so many of these rumors just get recapitulated over and over and over again. Well, what did I had some stuff here. So yes, I mentioned over at sentinelnews.substack.com, the birth of a new science academic UAP research. This is the report on the first day. There were 2 days, at least, maybe even a third day, of the SUAP, Society for UAP Studies conference. Baptiste Friscourt has given a review that you can find there. If you were tantalized by our talk with Greg Bishop about this conference, you can find out more about it in this review there. And just lots and lots of UFO news. I know not everybody's into the UFO thing as far as anomalies go, but that's my favorite area of interest, as well as parapsychology, consciousness, that sort of thing. So over at Kevin Randall's blog, A Different Perspective, and his vlog, his video log, and audio version of it, the podcast, in his latest episode, or one of his more recent episodes, he's lamenting, again, this refocusing on cases that, as far as he and other old school ufologists have long concluded is, in fact, bunk, these crash reports. This one, in this case, is the Kingman UFO crash. And interestingly, he's talking about how, again, this is just gets recapitulated and people are taking it up as if it's something new and interesting and relevant. But he mentions, of course, that, and of course, apparently this has been revived by Christopher Mellon. He says this latest flat began when Christopher Mellon, who had been the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, released a redacted email exchange that he had with a person Mellon called a senior U.S. government member. We are not provided with a name. That meant, of course, that we could not verify that this source existed or if he had any inside knowledge about the Kingman UFO crash. That email with the critical information redacted and with little in the way of useful information is seen here. But he talks about, like so often is the case, Kevin, being at this for decades now, has already investigated so many of these things. And while you may not agree with his analysis, I mean, his data is still worth considering in light of these new efforts to dredge back up these events. And he talks about how one of the key person, Arthur Stancil, in this incident with regard to the Kingman UFO crash, was involved with some kind of group get-togethers where they would try various metaphysical occult techniques, something that I know Kevin Randall is not particularly fond of or an enthusiast or believer in. And he proceeds to relate how this Arthur Stancil had some very interesting experiences whereby they were more or less doing astral travel, remote viewing, and tried to apprehend information about the UFO that this person had seen, and came away with what, of course, Kevin Randall considers to be just pure science fiction or fan fiction, the likes of which sound very much like stories that we've heard in various sci-fi stories, the ship being like a prison ship and them going around the galaxy. Anyway, you can read more about that there, as well as I'll provide a link to the actual video, which you can listen to on YouTube or watch on his Rumble channel. But there's also these more down-to-earth scientific research efforts into the UFO phenomena. This paper, Eye on the Sky, a UAP research and field study off New York's Long Island coast, done by, I'm guessing these guys are brothers, John Joseph Tedesco and Gerald Thomas Tedesco. This is over at SCRP, Scientific Research and Academic Publisher.org. And you can, it's got the article, but it's actually got the whole entire paper. It's nicely broken down with all the citations and images and data on their research efforts. But basically, they outfitted one and then another mobile research unit, an RV with a variety of sensors, and they definitely came away with a lot of data of seemingly anomalous objects or seemingly anomalous things that they were not seeing necessarily visually with their own optics, their own eyes, but with these instruments. In fact, that's one of the conclusions is that they notice is that the majority of the things that they were picking up was with these sensors and not seen by the naked eye. This paper goes into great detail about how they eliminate prosaic aircraft and Venus and that sort of thing, but they still ended up with a large number of anomalous sightings, and they are doing the full gamut. You know, one of the things that we talked about, Greg and I, last week in talking about, you know, some of the papers that were being presented, Kevin Knuth and others, Kevin Knuth being part of UAPX, one of those new organizations that, like these Tedesco brothers, are going out in the field and trying to do multiple instrumented observation experiments. And I highly recommend you check this out. They're also using radar and a variety of other instrumentation. So here's a picture of one of the research vehicles that they outfitted. At some point, they needed a bigger vehicle. I'm not sure if this is version 1 or version 2, but they definitely graduated to a larger vehicle to accommodate more of the pieces of equipment that they were using. So in section 5 discussion, the Nightcrawler, the mobile research vehicle, the RV that they used, they described all the different efforts here. During this period, we observed odd displays of light that frequented the coastlines, especially more abundant on and off the South Shore. Whether they are more of a coastal phenomenon or if there are equal numbers of incursions inland remains to be seen, pending further studies. These findings open up exciting possibilities for future research and discovery. There's a lot of really good information here, and they consider the possibility that maybe these are drones, but they also report what some UAP observers have often described, that there seems to be an interaction between them and these things. I think if you give this article, this paper a chance, you'll see that it's doing its due diligence. And I was actually surprised. Okay, this is near the area where the horrible TWA Flight 800 disaster occurred. And that, if for those that don't remember, was this hundreds of people on this flight were killed when the plane exploded in midair off the coast. And what they say here, let us consider just for a moment the potential implications to the integrity of our skies alone by turning to the tragic case of TWA Flight 800, a humanitarian disaster that struck in the Atlantic Ocean just tens of miles away from this project's leading field study site of Robert Moses State Park. Oh, wow. I didn't realize when I read this. So I'm listening to 99PI, the podcast's year-long explication of The Power Broker, a very famous book about Robert Moses and his power broking. Anyway, questions remain despite the quote-unquote official explanation of the fuel tank explosion. The event was witnessed by many credible onlookers who claim they saw an object or light traveling at a high velocity towards the ill-fated plane that early summer evening in July of 1996. Since this time, the topic of UAPs has reverberated worldwide. Anyway, the point is that they're saying, given how much activity they were seeing that could not be verified as far as known flights and the kinds of sensors and transmitters that commercial aircraft are supposed to be doing, they're saying this, like everybody else, that this is a potential aviation hazard. And the proximity to this horrible accident from July of 96 is an interesting way of leveraging that data. The idea being that whatever these things are, their energy output or just a collision could have somehow ignited the fuel tank that caused the explosion of TWA Flight 800. Now, I recall that in the Anomaly Archives collections, we have, of course, Robert Durant's materials, and one of the areas that he, of course, as a pilot was very concerned about was TWA Flight 800. Of course, in the conspiracy community, there has long been speculation, if not, some believe, hard evidence for the fact that this was an accidental shoot down by an exercise going on with shoulder-mounted rocket launchers and or a suppressed terrorist attack. Those are all, of course, speculations that are not accepted by the mainstream. So anyway, I highly suggest you check this out. It's a very good long but very concise and easy to read article. It may not interest everybody. If you're interested in alien abductions and that sort of thing, or contact or occupant cases, this will not interest you. This is purely a sightings kind of a case. We've got a link, of course, to another paper presented by several people, a huge plethora of people, including one of those Tedesco, or both of them, John and Gerald, with a very similar title, The Scientific Investigation of UAP Using Multimodal Ground-Based Observatories. And this was from a year ago, published on various science websites. And if you look them up, I believe it's John Joseph Tedesco has some patents for, I believe, some electromagnetic and or radar type technologies. But this just goes to the fact that there are a wide variety of efforts that have been done with this way. Of course, I mentioned UAPX, which has their website. Where is that? Yeah, nope. These are all of them. Gosh, where is it? Oh, I didn't bring up that one. So UAPX, I mentioned Kevin Knuth, has their effort. Jeremy McGowan is one who had been building a mobile vehicle with instrumentation. You've probably seen him in this mobile vehicle and its instrumentation fail at a Skinwalker Ranch in the reality TV show. But this is an effort that's going on by a lot of different groups. UFO DAP, the UFO Data Acquisition Project over at UFODAP.com. Of course, the Jeremy McGowan site is medium.com/@OsirisUAP. The outfitted vehicle is called Osiris. And I was reminded, of course, back in 2013, Douglas Trumbull, the visual effects designer from such famous films as Blade Runner and Alien and many, many others, back in 2013 launched the UFOTOG project, where he was outfitting a military Humvee with some advanced tech. And I think I have a little clip here from that flashback in 2013.
This sequence shows the first night of testing the UFOTOG system aboard the Humvee on location.
Things got to open a lot faster to catch UFOs.
There's a great deal of work to be done to optimize our ability to look for transient anomalies in the sky, both day and night, at almost any location. As we calibrate the systems, we will begin to gather useful data on object size, distance, altitude, trajectory.
Now, unfortunately, to my knowledge, this was not deployed very much in a research capacity. And of course, Trumbull passed away several years later. And what did emerge was use of this new optic system that he developed for a system called, I believe, Magi, that they did release in a quote-unquote immersive cinematic experience that featured a UFO researcher. It was a fictionalized story of a UFO researcher basically using this kind of a device. So it's unclear to me what really happened with that. But of course, he's all very reminiscent of something that we'd already seen here in Austin before quite some time ago. Here's a clip about Ray Stanford's legendary, infamous Project Starlight International, PSI.
Trying to trap a UFO is now big business. In the scrubland of Texas, Ray Stanford heads Project Starlight International with $1 million worth of equipment. The laser is to signal to spaceships his goggles in case they answer back. The aim is to use the highest technology to establish beyond doubt that craft from other times or worlds are visiting the Earth. Centerpiece of Project Starlight's armory is a computer to monitor UFO activities in the area.
When this line doesn't begin to show up,
This is an Operation Argus alert. Please proceed as you've been instructed.
The computer automatically calls up spotters to scan the skies. And it really hits the panic button if a landing is indicated.
Right. So again, this is an old idea. So much of the UFO community and the UFO scene now is just recapitulations of what's been done before. Of course, obviously the technology has improved, and we are on the precipice of a lot better UFO data gathering. But of course, what is the likelihood that any of these will record human interactions with these phenomena? That is the main reason I think most people are interested, contact, abduction, close encounters. But still, fascinating. Speaking of UFO sightings, we have the National UFO Reporting Center in newfork.org as sighting number 182416 from late July of this year, right here in Spring, Texas, USA. That's not Austin, Texas, but a nearby town in here in Texas. A triangular-shaped UFO viewed from approximately 60 feet distant. Now, this is the witnesses alleged a recreation of what they saw out their window, out their back door, black triangle, red lights in the corner, white light in the center. And so as this is making the rounds, of course, commenters are just like, well, that's obviously fake. Well, it's a recreation of what they saw. They did not actually take a picture. The sighting did not last very long. They said, I thought I heard an airplane flying unusually low, so I looked outside to see. The craft wasn't moving very fast, and I was right next to my back door, but I wasn't fast enough to get a picture. It was going slow enough where I got a good look. It was a large black triangle, and the underside had red circular lights on all 3 points. There was a much larger white circular light in the middle of the underside. Meanwhile, there's this absolutely great recreation of a 1999 Warwickshire, UK sighting by Finn 365 on YouTube. I really recommend their YouTube channel. You can find a variety of CGI recreations, UFO sightings. These are always interesting. A lot of attention to detail goes into these efforts by, I think it's Finn Handley is the artist name, and he works with the witness. And in this case, there's actually an interview with him, between him, the creator of the video, and the witness. So highly recommend that. Now, something else that came about recently. Oh, I forgot to get this up there. Oh, well. There's a great video that you can find in our Flipboard. It's on YouTube, and it is the latest, or one of the more recent live shows from Jeffrey Mishlov's New Thinking Aloud series. And it was a roundtable featuring a number of people that he's interviewed, including Charles Upton, Whitley Strieber, Greg Bishop, Nick Cook, Daz Smith, and many others, all of whom are, their interviews have been transcribed and edited and are being put into a book that you can purchase soon, if not already. The link will be in the show notes at the end of the episode when we post them. But there were some very interesting clips that I wanted to play. This first one is just from the introductions where they were going around and having different people introduce themselves. And this one is from Charles Upton that I found very interesting.
Something I found by a William Sims Bainbridge, who is a well-known transhumanist. He's very much integrated into the scientific establishment of this country, and goes and travels in very exalted circles. Back in 1981, he read a paper at the 19th Goddard Memorial Symposium of the American Astronautical Society, which took place in Pentagon City, Virginia, undoubtedly on Pentagon property, probably attended by a number of the military brass from that institution. And in that, he said this: these flying saucer cults are all quite insignificant, but one like them could well rise to prominence in a future decade. We need several really aggressive, attractive space religions. meeting the emotional needs of different segments of our population, driving traditional religions and retrograde cults from the field. New cults tend to be not very creative, but draw their practices and doctrines from other groups and traditions. If they are to get galactic visions, the best source is probably science fiction. Not only does science fiction offer grand images of galactic civilizations and specific notions of how to achieve them, but it is drenched in occult and pseudoscientific ideas which might well serve people's religious needs if packaged in new churches. So I think this is the essentially the goal of an awful lot of action on the part of the military industrial intelligence complex for many decades. This is what they want to create, and they've done a pretty good job as far as I'm concerned.
Now, I just want to contrast that, because that was something I believe he said happened in 1980, 81. A podcast I listened to, Patterns Tell Stories, referenced something in Volume 5 of Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science Journals that he wrote December 6, 2005, after returning from Austin when he was in San Mateo. The weather has turned cold. It froze overnight in Austin. Eric Davis kindly drove me back to the airport for the flight to SFO. I told him I thought he and Hal were grasping at straws, like all of us, seeking validation in an artificial vacuum. Hal was recently part of a panel assembled in Washington under semi-official auspices to discuss the potential impact of publicly revealing the reality of UFOs. Attendees were broken up into 64 societal sectors and 8 subcommittees. Initially open to disclosure, all members ended up recommending secrecy because violent reactions to disclosure would be uncontrollable. Religious zealots would go on a rampage, clamoring for witch hunts. Al doesn't know who organized the workshop or why. As for Kit Green, he now believes the alien autopsy to be genuine, a rare operation on a human subspecies, not an alien. Quote, but not a progeria patient either. Reference to Nick Redfern's Body Snatchers in the Desert that also came out in 2005. Upon landing, I called Hal again to thank him and to ask about the workshops. They involved John Peterson, but, quote, they went much higher, unquote. The participants were told that the U.S., Russia, and China all had custody of alien hardware. For now, I hold to my working hypothesis that the psychological warfare boys are playing games, as they've done consistently since at least 1952. Of course, both assertions could be true at the same time. There's so much more in these journals from Vallee. I want to play another clip from the roundtable on UAPs that I do recommend you check out, that was put on by Jeffrey Mishlove, and it's from Whitley Strieber talking about implants. Of course, in Lou Elizondo's new book, and in the interviews he's been giving, he is talking about the strange implants that have been removed from the bodies of UFO witnesses. In fact, there's one case, I haven't read the book, but he's speaking about this in the interviews, about a military veteran who had one of these implants, who had a UAP sighting or encounter of some sort, and had an implant allegedly removed by the Veterans Affairs folks. And apparently in these descriptions, Lou Elizondo invokes something I hadn't heard about or thought about in a long time, and that is Morgellons disease. This is a whole rabbit hole unto itself. And I had forgotten that apparently Mick West, the skeptic researcher, had been really focused on Morgellons for some time. But Elizondo draws the parallel between some of the weird aspects of these implants and this Morgellons. And Morgellons, without going too deep into it, people who suffer from it feel sensations that are described as bugs moving under their skin, and they often would find or see strange plastic-like filaments in or under their skin. And I recalled suddenly how back in 2010, as Mac White and I were doing our weekly PSYOP radio show, we were having Hank Albarelli back on as a guest. And Mr. Albarelli had written one of, if not the best book on MKUltra, massive book called A Terrible Mistake. But he had also been investigating Morgellons and the terrifying realm of our government and military's experiments with biological warfare and chemical warfare materials. And he had been reporting on Morgellons. And in my notes for one of the interviews, and I don't recall if we actually broached this in the interview, I'll have to go back and listen, but I had written a note about the connection or seeming possible connection between retrieved alien implants and Morgellons. So here we are 14 years later, and this is now being recapitulated in Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, apparently. But it reminded me of something else I'd heard from Whitley Strieber several years ago. Well, here's just a really brief clip from this recent panel that Strieber was a part of with Jeffrey Mishlove and others.
The implant in my ear, which I use in research all the time, is a physical object, but it was placed in there by two people, not by aliens.
I'm not sure where or when Strieber has explicated this, because as far as I know, for the longest time, of course, he has been talking about these experiences with these alien others, though he's quick to say he doesn't know that they're alien. But he did, of course, in the early 2000s, start talking about his memories and belief that he had been a victim of some kind of CIA MKUltra type of mind control experiments there in San Antonio as a child, that he somehow connects to his descriptions of a secret school. And there are deep, dark connections to MKUltra and the Nazis that were brought over as part of Operation Paperclip to San Antonio, Texas during that time. So it is entirely possible, and I'd say highly plausible, that he's correct, that they weren't aliens that were putting these implants in. But it also reminded me of how in 1999 or 2000, I saw Strieber at a National UFO conference there in San Antonio, talking about his attempts to have that implant removed. And in fact, the entire, or a 3+ minute video is on YouTube on Strieber's channel, where you can see their video of that attempted removal. There's nothing graphic here, but here is just a brief clip of that.
Hi, this is Whitley Strieber. What you're going to see today is 2.5 or 3 minutes of a video that was taken of the attempt to remove an implant from my left ear. I remember and have described in my book Confirmation exactly what happened as this thing was placed in my ear by some human beings, some people, in the middle of the night at my old cabin in upstate New York. Been very disturbed by it, and the doctor attempted to remove it with some quite surprising results, which you will see.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. I'm not sure when that video was recorded, but it's obviously from many, many years ago, and he did say that it was put in by humans much earlier than I recalled. And that is not the clip that I wanted to show. That's the beginning where he's laying this out. Anyway, it's about a 4-minute clip that's online. But still, what's important in that video is the seeming movement of the implant. This description by him and apparently the doctors and those trying to extract it, that when they tried to get close to it, it would move, that the implant was evading excision. That is, again, something that's described by Elizondo in this new book, describing the implant that was apparently eventually removed by the VA but was attempting to evade removal. Now, I forget who I was talking to recently, but somebody I mentioned this to reminded me that it reminded them of the description of a certain type of, I believe, Tibetan a seed, some kind of the idea that somehow monks or ascended masters would put the seed under their skin and that it would move around if they tried to mess with it. Who knows? But it just some interesting things coming up in all of these areas. Well, I'm not sure what else we're going to have time for tonight, but there was something else I wanted to mention, and I'm drawing a blank. There's lots more folks can look at. Oh, I was going to talk about, so the Trinity case that Valet and Paulo Harris have promoted is getting coverage from mainstream news. This isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's interesting. The headlines, I'm not going to show this, but are a UFO sighting and the creature seen by one man in the summer of 1945, quote unquote, they walk like us. The other, this isn't just any ordinary UFO encounter. Meet a man who says he has proof. And these are, I believe, both CBS News reporting on this. Of course, we've covered the fact that Douglas Dean Johnson has done a quite extensive debunking of the case. And for those of us who are huge Jacques Vallée fans, it's a bit disconcerting. I still find it a very interesting case, even if it's complete bunk. But, you can find the links to all that in our Flipboard. And last, this is a kind of a weird way to end it, but there's, as a Fortean, somebody who fancies the multitudinous array of anomalous weirdness that is Forteana after Charles Fort, the investigator of all things strange, way before the phrase UFO existed. One of the things that he often reported on were mystery falls of things from the sky, and such mystery falls are getting renewed attention through a couple of news outlets, and I'm going to play this a complete clip here, and then that'll be it for tonight. So here is, I'm not sure, well, you'll see who it is and what it is. What is it?
All right, so this next story is something you can really sink your teeth into. We're talking about, or not, we're talking about the Kentucky meat shower. Do you report on Kentucky meat showers? It's a real event in history books.
It's a thing?
Yeah.
On March 3rd of 1876, out of the clear blue sky, meat started to rain down.
And they gathered up what was remaining, and they say that it was a horse wagon full, and I'm sure that everyone knows exactly how much meat that means. And then I think people in the area ate it.
Okay.
Oh, no.
So that's right. Meat fell from the sky in Bath County, Kentucky, almost 150 years ago, and a single slice of that meat apparently saved. Transylvania University, I don't know why I have a little accent going there, has been holding on to this chunk of history, but this weekend it put the meat on display at a history museum. Why? Because why not? So everyone can then feast their eyes. One professor says people have their theories on what kind of meat it is and why it rained down from the sky.
One includes there's a weather pattern where winds will pick up small fish and frogs, and I think it's called an upspout, and then they lay them down in another place. For me, the vulture vomit theory is the only one that feels possible.
Wait, what?
Oh,
I do know.
a horse cart full of vulture vomit?
What's the upspout?
Not a thing.
Okay. All right. So vulture vomit. That sounds plausible. DNA testing of the meat has been inconclusive, but the Transylvania University has been scheduling events for people to see it again and again and again and flesh out their own speculation.
Okay. And people ate that?
Okay, so Paul, you'll probably love this story. A meat mystery on a much smaller scale happened in South Florida in 2017. Early one morning, 15 pounds of Italian sausage and pork chops apparently fell from the sky onto the roof of a family home, baffling everyone inside.
Okay. First one, in Kentucky, it's probably a tornado hit like a meat processing thing. I don't know, in the 1870s. Did they have that? Picked it up, storm dissipates, the meat falls. That's it. Okay.
I'll buy that.
Sorry to bring science into this thing.
End of story.
As for the one in 2017, I don't know. It's Florida. Anything's possible.
The X-Files.
So, yes, Transylvania University. That's transy.edu. That's the website. And burn, yes, burn. If you bite into a cheeseburger and turns out it's chicken sandwich, is that? I'm not even going to try to say that. You said that before I got to this, so I just had to put that up. All right, well, I thank you all for watching, and see you on the flip side. Good night.